Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Are you glad to be here? Oh, you nearly convinced me. That's been really great. Do you know, my biggest concern this morning, though, in all seriousness, is for Jimmy. Did anyone notice Jimmy disappeared? And I just think we'll be praying into that later and starting the social media campaign to find Jimmy. Justice for Jimmy. And so it's been great. It's been so good to be here this morning, and thank you for the invitation. It's so lovely to be here speaking about this reflection on what is our one job, what is our calling as a church. This sermon's been percolating in my brain for at least a year, and I love the way that God can kind of blindside you. And just in the reading just then, just noticed the disciples being sent out to make disciples, which might be a bit of a clue to the answer to the question. And did you notice that it said some doubted? And it just occurred to me the first time that Jesus calls us to make disciples, whether we doubt sometimes or not. That's just interesting, isn't it? You think, oh, I'm not qualified to be a disciple maker. I don't have my kind of super Christian badge on. I don't rip my shirt open and it says S underneath, SC, wouldn't it? Super Christian. I'm not in the same league as all these people on the stage, or as Jimmy the puppet even. And we have that kind of sense of, I'm not good enough, I'm not in that place. But even to those who doubted, Jesus said, go and make disciples. So that's been my realisation for this morning, and in case I forget to mention it later, I'll slip it in there. So, just reflecting on what is this one job of the church, and just reflecting, we go to the next slide please, just reflecting on our readings from this morning. What are some of the things that Jesus said? And they'll just come up here. Jesus said, I will build my church. That's Jesus' job. And then he says to us, and even to those who doubted, go and make disciples. Jesus said, I will build my church. Jesus said, you go and make disciples. What do those two things look like on the balance of the scales of responsibility within our church? And I would suggest to you, any of us who've been in church for a long time, some of us look like we've been in church for about 1,000,000 years, and that's just me speaking here. I'd suggest that the majority of the weight, the majority of our effort goes into building church. And by building church, I don't mean building buildings. I mean building up a church, running an organisation. It's all about the church. And I suggest to you, my friends, that perhaps we've got that wrong. Jesus said, I will build my church. That's what he's up to. He says to us, go and make disciples. And what would it look like if we reversed that and did that the other way round? So I think that's wrong. Oh yeah, no, we've done that already. We make disciples. We place the weight into disciple making. We say, let's do the thing that God has called us to do. And let's not worry about the church. It's interesting that one of the things Jesus didn't do when he was on the earth was plant a church. You find that interesting? He didn't establish congregations. He made disciples. And as we make disciples, the church will be built. And actually, I'm here today, I'm a Baptist, please pray for me. But I'm here to remind us that actually, I wonder if sometimes it feels a bit sad that we feel the need to label ourselves in all sorts of ways. Because there's only one church, I believe, and that's the Church of Jesus Christ. We serve him, we're in his people. He's building the church. And in the meantime, he calls us to make disciples. And actually, I think if we could redefine what we do in our church life and make disciple making the priority, I wonder if the way we lived as congregations, the way we lived as groups of God's people in various communities, will be really radically transformed. What is a disciple, I hear you ask?
What is a disciple?
Gosh, they're a tough crowd. Come on. What is a disciple, I hear you ask?
What is a disciple?
Okay, that was too enthusiastic. It's early in the morning. And I find the other verse that we read from Mark quite significant. Jesus appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out. And to me, and I wish I'd known what Jimmy was going to say, because adding to that list would have been imitate Jesus. So thank you, Jimmy. Oh, he's gone, hasn't he? Still feel emotional about that. We're called to be with Jesus, and we're called to be sent out by him. And as we spend time with him, we learn what it is to see what he's like and to imitate him. And then we're sent out to tell people about him. Now the problem with imitating Jesus is you could get thrown out of a church for doing some of that stuff. And I think we've got to grasp that. We say these things and we lob them out like that's the right answer. You know, the kind of Sunday school answer. Imitate Jesus, it's obvious, isn't it? But do you know, some of the stuff Jesus did, you know, if I do some of that stuff, I could be sacked. And you think I'm joking. What happens if I go to Baptist Assembly? And it's very like Avengers, it's very exciting. And I start smashing the tables up and throwing them upside down. They say, what did you do that for? And I said, well, Jesus did it. What do I do if I'm praying for someone who's blind and I spit and make mud and cake it all over their eyes? How's that going to go down? Jesus did some unbelievable, outrageous things. He talked to a woman who everyone was saying, stone her, she's evil. Then one of the most reviled people in their society in that moment for that crowd of people. And he says, well, I forgive you. Do we do that? We know that's the right answer. When the paedophile wants to come to our church, and we know how we feel about that, because we feel that inner revulsion, don't we? But can we say to that person as we imitate Jesus, I forgive you, I forgive you. Stop it! And we say that quite strongly in that instance, and we put a safeguarding plan in place and all that sort of thing. But are we willing to imitate Jesus even when that involves an outrageous action? Making disciples is relational. And we've turned it into this thing where you come to a program and we tick you off. And programs are helpful, but we need to realise that primarily it's relational. And actually, when you think about even the disciples who are doubting can be responsible for discipling other people, it's quite encouraging. Because to me, discipleship is literally people trying to follow Jesus together and trying to figure it out along the way. It's not rocket science, it's not about having neat boxes with all the answers. It's saying we follow Jesus and we're bettering that together as we try and figure that out. We do that relationally. We do that in conversation. That's how Jesus modelled it to us, didn't he? He hung out with these 12 people and others turned up and joined in. And some of them were the wrong sort. In fact, most of them were the wrong sort. None of these people were the people that the Pharisees would have picked to be disciples, but Jesus chose them. And he said, be with me and I'll send you out. So let's think about what it means to be with Jesus first of all. There'll be some pictures coming up on the screen. And the question for you is, which of these pictures, as they start to come up, best describes your relationship with God at the moment? I'm going to let you think about it for a moment. If we have more time, I'd let you think about it and talk to the person next to you, but I've only got 10 minutes left, I've got to crack on. The second question would be, which would you like it to be like? What is your relationship with God like? And if you're talking with someone at coffee time, you can talk to them about this, and you may find they interpret the pictures differently. That's all good. It's a conversation starter, and incidentally, you see, I think discipleship is conversational. And I think in our gatherings we need to work out what is it to have conversation, what is it to work things out together, what is it to learn from one another's experiences. Because Jesus says, I want to be with you. And sadly, there are times in my life when I'm like the person at the bottom there in the middle, and I'm pretending to God that I'm happy when I pray. And when you think about it, that's the most stupid thing you can do in the history of stupidness, isn't it? I'm pretending to God, who sees and knows everything, that everything's okay. And that's just mad, isn't it? And that's one of the things that church life can do to us. We have to feel like everything's okay. And we need to be free of that. We go to the next slide, please. Looking at this picture of Jesus calming the storm. And the question I'd ask you as you look at this is, who are you in this boat? Which character resonates with you? And as I've asked churches this question over the past few years, most people identify with the person on the far left, the person bailing out water. It's the common answer. I'm in the storm. I'm trying to fix it. Don't panic, Mr. Mannery. Here I am. I'm trying to get out of this problem. I'm rushing around. And that person is bailing out water when the storm has been stilled. The person next to him is faffing about with the sail. Now, when you're in a storm, where the fishermen are saying we're going to die, bailing out water is not going to help. It really isn't. There's only one thing that was going to help this situation, and that was to turn to Jesus, who was asleep in the corner of the boat, and say, "Wakey, wakey, we need you, help." And don't you love the way in this picture that the closer people are to Jesus, the more they look to him instead of trying to fix the problem? But you know what would make this painting even better? Would be if those people who were closer to Jesus were turning round to the person bailing water and saying, "No, Jesus has calmed the storm, look at that." But they're just so fixated on him. And actually, discipleship isn't just it's me and Jesus. Discipleship is how do I lead people to Jesus? How do we figure this out together as we go along on the way? So that's being with Jesus. Some thoughts about that. We go to the next slide. What does it mean to be sent out by Jesus, that we're called to go? And as we look at these geese following this lady, you look at this and you think, what is this all about? Has she got food in her pocket? What's going on? But actually there's more to this picture than meets the eye. And there's dear old Shep at the back rounding them up. And let me ask you a question. Do you think following Jesus is more like the first version of this picture or the second? Do you think that following Jesus says to us, "You know, you can do it if you like, I don't mind. Come on, I've got a bit of food, I'll coax you along. All carrot, no stick," that's Jesus. Or are there times when Jesus, through his Holy Spirit, rounds us up? When things happen, like the early church in Jerusalem, when God had said to them, "Go and make disciples, go into all the world." And there they were months later in Jerusalem. And a persecution broke out. Was the persecution of God? No. Did God use it? Yes. A few years ago, there was this thing called COVID. You might have heard of it. My goodness, COVID, the thing that we wish we'd never had and never seen. Was COVID from God? No. Let me be clear about that. Did God use it? Yes. Because I think God has been shaking his church and reminding us that he's not called us to sit in buildings. When we gather in our buildings or in places like this, that's a key and important component of our faith as we meet together, as we gather and listen to Jesus together. But he's called us to go. And I think God has shaken his church, a bit like a child with a toy box. I know it's in here somewhere and they're tipping it all out. And I wonder how much we've been tipped or shaken. And God is saying, "I want you to go. And I give you authority. I give you power. I don't send you out powerless. I come with you, and I am with you always." I think the thing we need to realise as we think about going out is that people are more important than projects. That's on the next slide, please. People are more important than projects. And I think, again, if we came to the weight of scales thing that we looked at earlier, I think actually my experience is I spend my life travelling around churches. I think many churches, if you look at the balance of what they do and the way they behave, place projects above people. And it's an interesting question for those of us who are in leadership to look at what we're doing in churches. Are we running projects for the sake of people? And then what is the way we act within those projects, showing that they're for the people? Or are we quite pleased we've run a project? Are you like one of the churches that I led, where we ran our family project and we regularly had over 100 people? And they loved the busyness, they loved the activity. And then one day we ran the family project. I think it was the FA Cup final. Something was going on. And I think we had 30 people turn up. The church was absolutely dejected, really miserable, until I said to them, "I thank the Lord we could talk to more people this morning." And as churches, we need to hear that. Because we celebrate busyness, we celebrate the big, we celebrate the shiny, but people are more important than projects. Jesus turned away from crowds to minister. There's nothing wrong with ministering to a crowd. We're doing that now, that's all good. But there are times when we need to prioritise the individual. We need to become more person-centred. As we remember that discipleship is people trying to figure out how to follow Jesus together. We go to the next slide, please. Witnesses. Jesus says, "You're my witnesses." And witnesses are simply required to describe their experience. Don't you love that? You can get someone on the stand in a court. They know nothing apart from what they saw. Don't you think that's brilliant? And when Jesus, says, you're my witnesses, go and tell people, I don't know how that makes you feel. Terrified. But doesn't it make you excited that actually you don't need to know anything? You don't need to be articulate, you don't need to be clever, although you obviously are. You just simply need to describe your experience. We simply need to learn to be honest about our faith. We simply need to learn to say, guess what happened to me? You won't believe it. I remember sitting in a table in a coffee shop with some other people, and they were talking about stress. And one of them was talking about a thing called Reiki, which is like crystals and New Age healing and stuff. And I was sat there, and this was actually in a church coffee shop, and I was the minister, so I had a problem. Because this is one of those moments where I think, if this is overheard, and I'm not rebuking this person and hitting them with my Bible, I could be sacked. But I'm thinking, but I don't want to bow to that pressure. I want to be an imitator of Jesus in this, mate. So I said to this person, tell me about Reiki. How does it work? Does it make you feel better? And we talked about that. Other people shared some thoughts. And I said, when I get stressed, I pray. And I shared some examples. And I talked about Jesus in the storm. And every person around that table said, that sounds really good. And the people around that table who never came to the church service I led became people who I could pray for in the moment. I stood outside a school gate and prayed for one of these people who was stressed. Because that's what Jesus would do. We're not saying, well, unless you come to my church, you're not having it. We don't do that silly thing where we make church the funnel through which people have to come to get to Jesus. We go. We share faith where we are. We learn to be simply honest about what Jesus is doing in our life. We go to the next slide, please. We're coming to the end, don't worry. Thinking about this picture, I was looking for a picture of a woman at the well and I gave up. So instead, here's a picture looking over Loch Ness. If you look closely, you may be able to see a monster, but you probably won't. And I was walking the Great Glen Way earlier this year. It stretches from Fort William to Inverness. It's about, I forget, 70 or 80 miles. I did it in more than one day, you'll be glad to know. And as I reached the top of this hill, I've been walking about 10 miles. And as I walked around the bend, I feel my whole life is travelling around the bend. As I walked around the bend and I saw these benches, I silently thanked the Lord. And I sat there, and I had another 6 miles to go. And if you look at me, I'm hiding behind, it's glass actually, you can see. It's ridiculous that I'm in a sports centre, really, on a Sunday morning. I'm not the fittest person. And I was absolutely exhausted, and I'd absolutely had it. And I sat down, and the person who was sat next to me said, how's your day? I said, terrible. Don't know what I was thinking, but it's a lovely view. And they started talking to me. Do you know what? I just wanted to say to them, just leave me alone. Do you know when you're just really exhausted? Just go away. Go and look for Nessie. And I didn't, you'll be glad to know. Do you know when you're tired? Jesus sat down by a well because he was exhausted. And a woman came to talk to him. And a few hours later, most of that woman's village had turned to follow Jesus. They'd become disciples. That's a clever evangelistic strategy, isn't it? Now, who here has ever engaged in the evangelistic strategy of let's all go and sit by a well and do nothing? I'm just looking, because there will be one. Isn't it amazing? You say, we're so busy doing stuff that we don't have time to sit by a well, or on a hill overlooking Loch Ness, or in a coffee shop, or wherever the Lord may call. We're so busy going to our next thing that we don't have time for people. And actually reflecting on the fact that it's a time for God to call us back to caring. And as soon as a church leader says to you, evangelism, go and tell someone about Jesus, it's like panic time, I'll be the prayer support. It's okay. And actually I think we need to look at evangelism through the lens of what we're really good at. And I think most of us in churches are really good at caring. We're really good at looking after people. And perhaps that's our way through with evangelism, is we just love the people in the world. We do stop to see the person who's alone. We do talk to the person who's in need of someone to listen to them. It's time to care. It's perhaps time to realise that a chaplaincy model A chaplaincy model perhaps offers us the best method that we will understand of what evangelism is, where we go to people, we talk to people, we listen to people, we love people, and within that we then talk about how God is real in our life. We listen to God and we listen to people. We have open eyes and open ears as we live our lives, listening to the Holy Spirit, but also listening to people around us and seeing what their need is. I remember walking through a village once, and back to my level of fitness, you always go the shortest way, don't you? Unless it's a hill, you always go around the hill. And as I was walking across the village, I just felt a voice in my head. So I realised I've just worried some of you, but I think it was God. You'll work out at the end of this story. And the voice in my head said, go that way. So I went round the bend, see? Lots about me that's round the bend. And as I travelled around the bend, I bumped into someone. No, I didn't. I saw someone, stopped to talk to them, two different things. Stopped and talked to them. And I said to them, how are you? Half an hour later, I was very late for my meeting. And this person said to me, thank you for stopping to listen to me. And I said to them, do you know, it's such a privilege. But when I was walking this morning, I was going the other way, and I felt God say to me to come this way. And actually, God wants you to hear that. You're worth that to God. I confess that most of my life, I wonder if I'm too busy to hear those voices, to hear those problems. What are we full of? What are we full of? Are we overflowing? Because the more with Jesus, the more we become full of his presence, and the more that presence will flow out of us. And that's simple. I believe in simple Christianity. We do the simple things well. And the very last slide then. God is calling us back to discipleship. He's calling us to make disciples the central and most important thing that we do. How will we go about that? So let me tell you about April. April was someone who, someone in one of my churches that I led, befriended at the school gate, and over a period of time they got to know each other. Over a period of time they talked about Jesus, and April became a Christian. I was expecting a little cheer then, but never mind. April became a Christian. And my friend said to me, April's become a Christian. Inside I did a little dance, just inside because I'm British. And I was just really excited about it. April's become a Christian, wonderful. And then my friend Anne said to me, April's become a Christian, but she can't come to church on a Sunday. Because April's parents were elderly and she was their primary carer. And she couldn't come to church on a Sunday pretty much ever. She came very occasionally. And Anne said, what are we going to do with that? How does that work? And in the end, we came to the point where I said to Anne, well, you and I will just sit and have a coffee with April once a week. We'll give her a Bible. That's always the right answer, right? And we'll ask her to read Mark's Gospel. And each week we'll just read a little tiny bit of it. And we'll talk to her. And we always started by saying to April, what did you think about what you'd read? And at the end of this process, a year or two later, I left the church to move somewhere else. And I looked at April's life and faith. And I thought, do you know, I think I've discipled April better than anyone I've ever discipled before. Because I did it relationally. And I did it with the Bible. And we didn't use a course, and the courses cherry-picked the verses that we like and are easy. We went through some difficult bits of the Bible. And I think April knows Jesus better than people who've come to a lot of stuff in a church building. And I'm really challenged by that. But you know what I'm especially challenged by? There's a time in my life, because I'm an activist, I want to be doing stuff. There's a time in my life when I would have been too busy for April. And I'm ashamed of that. I share it to you to give some of you hope. Because some of you are sat here thinking the same thing. I would have been too busy to go and disciple April.